Hello all, this is going to be the lecture for chapter 15 on monopolies. How I'm going to do this is I'm going to go through the slides on my own presentation, and I'm going to be very clear about which slide I'm on, what I'm going over, and I'll either lecture or go through and take my own notes and show you where I'm doing things like graphing or calculations. So you can take your own notes and follow along with me on the slides yourself. Um, so sometimes I might be looking down. If I am, just ignore that. I'm also going to go through the slides kind of quickly, so feel free to pause, go back, rewind, watch things again, whatever you need to do to make sure that you're learning the material and understanding it. So I'm going to start with the strong start for today. Go ahead and read the question and answer this. Can you think of a good or service you can get from only one firm or person? And how do you think this situation, if you can think of one, how does it change the market? If you can't, how might it change the market if you could only get pizza from one place or go to the movies at one theater? How would that change the interaction between consumers and producers? So go ahead and pause here um, and answer this question. You can discuss it with a neighbor. I also recommend doing these lections in groups of 2 to 4 so you can talk through things, ask each other questions. So pause. You can talk with a neighbor, write down your answer, whatever you'd like to do. And then when you're done, come back, hit play, and we're going to go to the second slide, which is just the agenda for today. So the agenda, and this is chapter 15, Monopolies. It follows logically with the reading. So if you ever have any questions, you can go back to the reading to get more detail, to get a further explanation. Our learning target, I can describe a monopoly and analyze a market with a monopolist. A monopolist would just be a firm or person that runs a monopoly, or the company itself. So we're going to start going over what are monopolies, how do they work, what are the conditions that create a monopoly, etc. And then we'll put ourselves in the shoes of a monopolist and think, how would we make decisions as a monopoly, and how will it be different from a regular market, something like perfect competition? And we'll end thinking about welfare. What are the efficiency and equity implications of a monopoly in the market? So go ahead and move to the next slide. What is a monopoly? It gives you a definition and some examples of a monopoly. So the definition, a monopoly is the sole seller of a product with no close substitutes. Mono means, it's a prefix that means one, so it's one company. So some examples of this, there's a lot of historical examples. There are not as many monopolies as today. Your local cable company is sort of a monopoly. About 10 years ago, it was definitely a monopoly. Today, there are some more competitors through similar goods. I don't know if you'd call them direct substitutes, but things like Netflix, Hulu, they're offering similar services that are starting to compete with cable, and that's taking away cable's monopoly power. 10, 15 years ago, when I was your age, Microsoft had a monopoly with Windows computers. If anyone wanted a computer, laptop, desktop, anything, it had to have Windows. Apple was not really a big thing then, but Apple created a computer. It became very popular. It's very effective and useful, and they've started to create competition. So the computer market, the software piece, is no longer a monopoly. Another one would be an electric or water company. These are called natural monopolies. So in San Francisco, there's one company that provides electricity. There's one company that provides water, and they're called natural monopolies. We'll talk about them more in depth later. All right, go ahead and move to the next slide. This is titled, How Do Monopolies Come About? So why do we get monopolies? The big thing here is barriers to entry. One of the key assumptions about perfect competition, which is a flawed assumption, is that firms can enter and exit the market freely without any costs. This is not the case. In a monopoly, one of the reasons a monopoly arises is that there are major barriers to entry. It's very, very difficult to enter the market, so firms don't. The three main reasons that the three main barriers of entry, the first is resources. You need something to enter this market, something probably very expensive, or you need to get control of it. The second is government regulation. The government might create a law that says that, or a patent that says that this firm has a monopoly on this for a certain period of time or forever. And the last is the production process. If the production process itself sometimes lends to a monopoly being the most efficient way to produce something. So let's start with resources. Go to the next slide, titled Monopoly Resources. One example of a current monopoly is a company called De Beers. De Beers is the main diamond distributor in the world. So if you go to a jewelry store and you want to get anything with a diamond in it, it probably came from De Beers. They own, I think, about 80% of the world's diamonds, which would be considered a monopoly. The percentage varies. The government uses a rating system to say what percentage of the market is controlled by this company. It's pretty complex, something beyond what we need to do here. But just know that you don't have to have 100% of the market to be considered a monopoly. So De Beers controls all the diamonds, and they can sell diamonds. These types of monopolies controlling resources used to be more common. In the US, there was US Oil, US Steel, where this was the only company you can get oil from, the only company you can get steel from. These were eliminated for two reasons. First is regulation. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, we'll talk about that a little later when we start to talk about welfare. And I would say the reason that it hasn't come back about is competition. The world's much more competitive. It's very challenging to be the only producer of a good. There are oil companies all around the world. There are steel companies all around the world. And they create competition, which makes it hard to control the market as a monopolist. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. So we're on government created monopoly. So this is the second reason that you might have barriers to entry. So the government sometimes grants a firm exclusive rights to sell a good or service. The two main ways they do this are patents and copyrights. A patent is typically on some type of technology or invention, and a copyright would be on something like a book or a manuscript, intellectual ideas and artwork. And so the government, what they do is you apply for a patent or a copyright, and the government says, you own this, you are the only one that can sell it. So any book you buy, no one else can produce that book. It's why things like downloading movies is illegal. It's why you have certain drugs that you can only get from one drug company. So what are the effects of this? The monopolists can sell for a higher price. If you can only get the Harry Potter books from J.K. Rowling, from her publisher, then they can charge whatever they want if you want to buy that. If you have a disease that has a cure, but only Pfizer sells that drug, they can charge whatever they want. And this has a major problem. So why would the government do this? The big reason is incentivizes creative activities. So inventing a drug, writing a book, creating a movie requires a very large investment. Once those things are created, though, it's pretty easy to copy them. A chemist could go in and easily just make a drug again. So the government creates patents to defend it. It rewards the firm that creates or the person that writes. And this allows them to get some of the rewards and benefits from the creation. There's good and bad to this. As I said, they can charge whatever they want, but it does theoretically incentivize this creative action. All right, go ahead and move to the next slide. We're on natural monopolies now. So a natural monopoly, this is the third type. This is where the production process lends itself to a firm being a monopoly. So what happens is a single firm can supply the good or service at the lowest possible cost. It's best for everybody to have just one firm producing things. Examples of this are public utilities such as water and electricity, and some club goods like a non-congested bridge, or most bridges. And we'll talk about why this is. So utilities companies. Utilities, things like water and power, require incredibly large initial costs. They have very, very high startup costs. The fixed costs are very high, but the variable costs are incredibly low. So in order to create a power grid, you need to install power lines, you need plants, you need all this. But once you have that stuff, continuing to operate it is not as expensive, and adding one more house to the power grid is fairly easy because the system is in place. Powering that last house is not expensive. So it's actually best if only one company is producing power, if only one company is supplying water. And this is an example of something called continuous economies of scale. So if you think about the graph, the average cost graph, the average cost graph of a natural monopoly is always going down. So you can see here that as we go along, the average cost goes down. This means the marginal cost of the next unit is always lower and lower. This will never go back up. So previously we saw average cost, you go down for a while, but then you come back up. This is not the case with a natural monopoly, and that's why we create the monopoly and allow just one company to run it. All right, so let's distinguish. So what distinguishes a natural monopoly? Going on to the next slide. Typically, no one tries to compete with it. You don't see anyone building another bridge across the bay. You don't see anyone trying to create another power company in San Francisco. Other monopolies, they could control a production process or a key resource. All right. So let's move to I'm going to pause here actually and upload this video. So this is the first part. That was on what is a monopoly. The next video is going to be on monopoly decision making.